Yeah. I know, it's so great. They let
I
us.
have some notebooks in my car. She has some notebooks. Like 10 notebooks. We are.
Oh,
Are we live?
Hi.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. And my name is Julie McFadden. I am a nurse, and I'm also an author of Nothing to Fear. I'm the host and mediator. No.
Moderator.
Moderator.
We're not going to fight.
Yeah, no.
If we fight, you can also
I
mediate.
mean, you never know. No,
you never know. It's totally true.
And I'm on social media as Hospice Nurse Julie. But who we're really here for, you guys, is Meghan Riordan Jarvis. And for some reason, I always have the hardest time saying her name. I tell her this all the time.
It's too many names. It's too many names.
She is a trauma therapist. She is my friend.
Yes,
she is lovely and warm, and she wrote these two wonderful books. Now, we're going to be talking about Can Anyone Tell Me today, but she also wrote The End of the Hour, which is an amazing, amazing book. And she has a podcast that I was on. What's the name of the podcast?
Grief is my side hustle.
Yeah, grief is my side hustle. There's a question from our podcast that we did that I'm going to bring up because I love what you said, and I'll never, ever, ever forget it. And I've been on a million podcasts.
I hope I say it again.
Yes, you will.
Okay,
no, I'll tell you. I'll tell you what it is because I repeat it, and then I have to say who said it because I love it so much.
Good.
She also has started Grief-tastic Book Fair, which was held yesterday. Was that the first one?
That was the first one.
And and she's like, it's like this. It's like your school book fair, but sadder, which was hilarious. And it's not sadder, right? It's.
I mean, we laughed so
fun.
hard.
It's tons of fun.
The books were sad.
Yeah, the books were sad. I mean, yeah, but it was a beautiful, beautiful. You're bringing like a whole community together. So, thank you.
Yes.
Is there anything I missed, my dear, that you want me to talk
about?
No,
that's good.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Please welcome the lovely author, Meghan Riordan Jarvis.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yay!
Yay!
So, I have questions about your book, but I think what I'm first going to ask about or talk about is what we talked about on your podcast. I mean, honestly, probably almost 2 years ago when she had written End of the Hour.
Yes.
And I was telling her, because I'm a hospice nurse and I see patients and families all the time. And I wrote a book and talk about how, like, some of the main things I always hear people say. And one of the things was how they fixate on this one thing, like over and over again. If I just would have done this, if I only would have done that, or it sounded like this, he looked like this, and just over and over and over again. And no matter what I could say, it wouldn't matter. And they'll just go to another person and go, well, what do you think? Another person, what do you think? Because they keep fixating on what they saw or what they went through, right? And if you don't remember, that's what you want to spot. Do you remember?
I remember
what you, and I told you this.
You tell them and I'll tell them why.
Well, I said this to you and you said, sometimes it's easier. I'm going to butcher this. She'll say it better, but sometimes it's easier than to actually acknowledge that they're dead, right? That you fixate on something so you don't have to deal with the feelings of your loved one being gone. And I don't know why I had never thought of that. And when you said that, I was like, oh, of course. Yeah. Well, you say it better.
Yeah, I mean, it's called rumination. So it's in the book. It has a clinical name. It's not like I was the genius that came up with this idea. I was just telling Julie someone else really smart. In fact, our colleague, Mary Frances O'Connor, writes a lot about it in The Grieving Brain. But the brain is essentially a prediction tool. So it is taking in information and it's comparing it against other experiences that it has already had. And then it's using that template to sort of predict what it expects to happen in the future. And a rumination is there because something went haywire in that process. It was scanning the environment for threat. It didn't see the threat. It didn't code the threat. You can't see death coming. And something catastrophic happened. The brain then gets fixated on trying to figure that out. And so it could get fixated on the actual facts of it. Or it could get fixated in guilt. Like, if only I had, why didn't I? It can also do that, which is, a way of sort of implying that you may have had some agency, which the brain would love for you to do, because that would mean, if only I had X, then he wouldn't have died. Now I can solve the problem and make sure it never happens again. So the rumination tool is kind of like, that in and of itself is predictable. We do it. We always do it because death is so threatening to us. And from a sort of emotional standpoint, it makes sense. because even though it's super painful, and I had the experience that I write about in End of the Hour of really being fixated on the last couple of days of my mother's death and feeling deeply culpable, like if only I had done things differently. And I think this is what I said to you, that feeling like crap and blaming myself, I have lots of experience doing that over many, many topics. I know how to do that. What I didn't know how to do was live without my mom. So it was simpler, easier, more efficient, and actually safer to feel like crap and loop and loop and loop in that thought rather than sit with just the reality that she had been in my life my whole life and she wasn't there anymore.
Is that someone of the, not that there's a direct antidote, you do this and the rumination will stop, you know, I'm sure it's like a ongoing thing, but is just the awareness enough? Is just saying that to someone enough to kind of,
That's a great question. Probably the answer to that is no, but the awareness helps.
Yeah.
So if you can, that's probably true with anything, right? Like if you're, I don't know, going to get dressed. This is a girl thing. Women are going to understand this. And all of a sudden you're like, all my clothes look bad on me, but they're the same clothes that looked good on you 2 days ago. It's probably not about the clothes.
Yeah.
So if you like, the awareness helps, it may not be enough to help you figure out why you're suddenly frustrated with what you're, but what happens in grief, at least, in some cases, in my case, in End of the Hour, and in several of the cases that I talk about in Can Anyone Tell Me, is that rumination ends up sort of relentlessly attacking the system, the central nervous system, and causing distress inside the body and making a person ill.
Yeah.
So I don't have the backing of any scientist to say this, but I think ruminations, as a clinician, I think ruminations are way more dangerous than therapists generally approach them as. We validate them and we say, of course, you feel that way. But then we don't give a technique. And there are techniques where you stop the thought, you regulate your body physically. So you do things like jumping jacks or meditate, whatever's going to work for you. And then you invite portions of that thought back in intentionally and with agency. So it's rather than it's like, if somebody came in this room right now and screamed and said, I need your attention, I need to ask you a question, that would be really distressing.
Yeah.
But if I said, stand outside and wait, and when I'm ready, I'll come out and then you can ask me, then we can talk about that.
This is like what I need. This is the kind of thing when someone, because what I hear when I have a problem, or if I'm like, if someone's like, just have the awareness around it, I'm like, okay, yeah. And then what? Like, and then tell me what to do. Like, at least give me something to work with versus just like, oh, it's okay to feel that way, or this is why you're feeling that way. This is so helpful.
Predictably, I've knocked my microphone off. I hope that's better. I'm such a klutz.
I'm not just looking at my phone. The questions are on my phone.
But I feel the same way about this. That's sort of my passion project. And the reason that I wrote Can Anyone Tell Me is that I think as you don't even have to ask me a question. I'm going to just keep talking.
Well, you were leading into a question I was going to ask anyway. So go ahead.
The reason that I wrote this book, I read like 188 books on grief and loss. My husband can attest to this because every day another book would come in and my kids would be like, here's a really uplifting book for you to read, Mom. With the title of like death. Because I really wanted to have a deep understanding of like what was already out there. Because as a trauma therapist, we do not say, come into my office and just talk about your feelings, because feelings are what dysregulate you. And so some of the things that you see on TikTok, which are so well-meaning, people are talking about their personal experience and they're saying, these are the feelings that I had and this is how I addressed them. But there's a percentage of people for whom their grief is already causing them like borderline illness, that the symptoms are so overwhelming and no one has taught them what to do with those symptoms. No one has taught them how to mitigate sleeplessness. No one has taught them, what do you do when your stomach is completely shut down? And so while I appreciate the idea, there are these phrases like feel your feelings or give yourself permission to grieve, or I don't think those are particularly useful unless you say, and here are some things. That's what, here are some ways to do that. And for a lot of people, just feeling your feelings might mean they're not going to go to work for a whole week, because the cost of feeling their feelings and the intensity of their feelings is that they are really, really dysregulated inside their body.
So this leads to, you were talking about physical manifestations of grief, right? So I want to go to the next question about that, because your book talks about it. If I can find it here, about because that was so fascinating to me. Bear with me here. I'm just going to do it my own way. So can you kind of touched on it already, but you think and believe and have seen with your own eyes and experienced this, that grief can physically manifest, right?
Yes.
Physically manifest in your body.
Yeah. So I had a CEO one time, I do a lot of corporate work, and I had a CEO one time say, like, I don't really believe in that mind-body connection.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you believe in gravity? Like, it's not up for negotiation. Like, just because it's in a woman's magazine that like self-help and a mind-body connection doesn't mean that it's not based in neuroscience. So very quick little neuroscience lesson. And this is in the book, but this is my favorite thing to teach people, is that when you are in a state of threat, so that could be that someone died, it could be that your marriage is in trouble, it could be that you are about to fail a class, your brain responds in the way it knows how to respond. It's not sophisticated enough to know the difference between like a guy with a gun and you're about to fall off a cliff. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it doesn't really know. What it knows is it needs to turn on your fight, flight, and freeze instincts. And those are progressive. So we fight first, always. We flee second, always. And we freeze third, always. And every time I say that, somebody says, like, nope, I don't know.
I feel like I might freeze.
Yeah. So you learned that fighting and fleeing didn't work. And so you are conditioned to go to freeze.
Girl.
So, right? So those are,
don't
do it. But so it's a conditioning response, but we are in our core. Now, again, if you tell me to I can send you the data of where this is from. I didn't run these tests myself, but it is what I believe. So fighting and fleeing also don't work with grief. You can't fight it and you can't run away. So most of us end up in freeze. And so fight and flight come from the sympathetic nervous system, which is the activated part of your brain.
Can I interrupt? Now I really just want to hear what you guys think, because I want to hear what you think about this. So when I had my first big loss, my friend Shauna died, 17. I got a call from one of her friends, and her friend called me my nickname that only she called me. Okay, so when I answered the phone, she goes, Butch. And I thought it was her. I thought it was my friend. Her name's Shauna, but I called her Ralph. And I was like, yeah, what's up? Because I thought it was her. And even though it didn't sound like her, you hear the first nickname. So I'm like, hey, what's up? And she goes, Shauna died last night. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Who is it? Because I thought she was Shauna. I thought it was her.
Right.
So I was like, what? And she's like, yeah. Anyway, that's kind of the last thing I remember. I dropped the phone. We hung up. I fell to my knees and I ran, and then I got up and I ran. I ran out the door. I live in the woods. So I was running as fast as I could to the woods. And I remember hearing Mom being like, where are you going? Anyway, I wanted to stop you because I ran. That was the first thing. But you can't run away from grief. Which is what I learned.
Your body, again, doesn't
my body
thought it was a bear. Thought you were being, that was such a threat to your system to learn about. And that's a terrible way to learn. I mean, not that there's a good way, but that's awful, right? And you'll remember it forever.
Yeah.
But our system can only respond with the tools that it has. And so fight and flight are the ones that send us running, send us fighting.
Yeah.
And those are the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system. So when we have too much sympathetic nervous system, we're anxious, right? So we have too much energy from that part of us, that part of the brain. The parasympathetic nervous system is the one that causes us to sort of calm down, soothe, rest, and digest. And when we can't run away and we can't fight, we will end up in a free state. So most grievers have spent some time in a free state.
Yeah.
And freezing is where we dissociate. Freezing is where, and what's interesting as a trauma therapist is when people don't know this, they feel a tremendous amount of shame about how they end up reacting. Right. So my best friend called me in the middle of the night, told me that my friend Bart had died. And I was like, no, he didn't. I was like swearing at her. Like, why would you say that to me? Like swearing at her.
Yeah.
Until, I don't know, 90 seconds later, my brain was let it in a little bit. And for a long time, I was like, I can't believe I behaved like that to you when you were trying to tell me something really hard. Like I attacked you.
Yeah.
But people do that. Some people vomit or, all kinds of things happen. Those are all physical responses. So back to the idea of like, is there a physical component? There is. And then just quickly, because nobody needs as much neuroscience, but there are 12 cranial nerves, and they send messages down into our body. There's one nerve, our 10th nerve, which is a superhighway. So it sends messages down and then it gets messages from the body. So the analogy that I use in the book is like the amygdala, when it enlarges, it sets off that fight, flight, freeze response. But it also, when it enlarges, stops the regular electrical currency, which goes from the bottom of your brain to your prefrontal cortex, where you can like do math and remember directions. That when it cuts it off, it's a little bit like this analogy that I use in the book is like, imagine the mailman is trying to deliver important messages that he delivers every day into these mailboxes. Except today, like the bridge washes out and he can't, that's the trauma, and he can't get the mail to the mailboxes. So he kind of stands on the shore and tries to throw them in the general direction. But they don't, some go to the wrong mailbox, some end up in the river. So the messages that are supposed to go to your hippocampus to form memory, or your hypothalamus to tell you what temperature to be, don't get there. And so those parts of the brain are dysregulated. They send the wrong messages down into the body. And now your body doesn't have hunger cues, or you're shaking because it doesn't have the stability. That, and then
like your sleep is messed up, right? Memory, brain fog, all the things.
So many things.
Yeah.
And it takes a while for those things to calm down. For lots of people, they calm down on their own. But for lots of people, they need to be taught the tools to help bring their body back into regulation.
Wow. I don't know about you guys. I'm sitting here like, I didn't know. I did not know. And so the next one I want to talk about, because I didn't know this either. So in my book, chapter 6, we talk about deathbed phenomena, because my book is all about like death and dying and hospice and how to talk about death and dying. And there is a part of death and dying that feels somewhat supernatural. There's like deathbed phenomena and it's not like a thing I'm trying to make people believe. It's just sort of a thing I like to educate about, because it happens and we don't know why it happens. And it happens enough that like, it's a thing. Each hospice company, each hospice nurse, we kind of learn about it and educate about it, just so people aren't like freaked out when they see it. Right.
Yeah.
But there's stuff about that in your chapter about, people seeing butterfly. I think it's called why does mom look like a butterfly or something?
Why do I think that butterfly is my mom?
Yeah.
So again, like in the book, I tried to cover, when I decided to write this book and had read lots of other books, I really went to my clinical experience working with grievers. And I had this whiteboard in my office for a long time that anytime a griever, it's like my little data sheet. Anytime a griever told me something that had helped them, I would write it down. Anytime they told me something that they were struggling with, I would write that in a notebook to sort of be like, what can I help find them? Because, there's a number of really skilled grief educators in the room, but we're always looking to increase our toolkit, because there isn't like one standard protocol that you follow. And one of the things that people typically struggle with is some sort of sense of spirituality. So not necessarily religion. I remember being on a call before Hope and I knew each other. This is Hope Edelman of Motherless Daughters, and asking her, do people, you may not remember this, but I was in Montana, and I jumped on this call. It was like a free call to talk about grief and loss. And I really wanted to know, do people who have religion have an easier time? Because I was still really deep in my grief. I had been raised Catholic, but left the Catholic Church. And I was pretty willing to do anything at that time. I was like, if she tells me that people who have religion do better, then maybe I'll go back to church. Like, I'll do anything to do better. And what you gave was a really sophisticated answer about the struggle of spirituality. That people who have what you said, which
Hope's like,
just
okay.
to put words in Hope's mouth, was that people who have spent some time thinking about what they believe happens when you die tend to do better in terms of being able to have a place to think about their person. And I was really struggling with that at the time. So I am very inclusive. I was trained as a social worker. So all ideas are welcome. There are some really incredible books that have come out recently. One of them is by Lonely Planet, which I think is amazing, called Grief Rituals, that are just about sort of all the ways in which cultures approach this subject. It's part of humanity. What do we believe in spiritually? And grievers usually, I don't think when you're grieving a profound loss that you just skate through. I think you wonder, does what I believed previously really apply here? So in my experience, which I write about in End of the Hour, but I also talk about in the new book, I had this experience the day of my mother's funeral. I was still really ruminating, really blaming myself for her death. And which is a sign of PTSD, by the way, rumination's not going away. So I just feel like this is important to say, I still sometimes blame my mom for my mom for my death, blame myself for my mom's death. It's still a thing, even though I know it's not true, it's still a thing that happens. But I walked up to her house. At the time, I thought it was going to be the last time I was in her house. And there was a monarch butterfly on the lawn. And the monarch butterfly is the Christian symbol of resurrection, which I knew because I study this work. And I was like, weird, butterfly. I knew enough not to step on it. Monarch butterflies are not indigenous to where I grew up. They're very rare there because it's near the ocean and their wings can't tolerate all the salt in the air. And I put the little monarch butterfly because I was like, oh man, don't die. He was on the lawn. It was wet. I was like, are you dying? And I put it on my finger. And I have all these videos of this butterfly just clinging to me for hours. And then my younger sister woke up and I sort of scraped it off onto this piece of wood. And I went to I was like, I got to show you something. And it was gone. And yesterday, when I was talking at Grieftastic, people told me this and videoed it. There was a red hawk. JJ Duncan was like, I'm never going to get over it. I didn't see it, but that was circling. And for many people in that group, hawks mean something about, who their person is. And so since then, I've had lots of experiences that I feel like, well, I don't know what that was, but it wasn't nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. And I'm not going to pretend that I know how to describe quantum physics, but I do believe, I know, right? Science tells us that matter is not destroyed or created. So when someone dies, the cells that used to be them are somewhere on this earth. They're somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of love the idea of why couldn't they coalesce sometimes and become a cardinal on my lawn to say hi?
I know, or just the essence of it or something. Yeah.
So I don't know. Is that just what I want to believe?
Yeah,
probably. But I also think it's a little bit true.
Also, yeah, why not? Why not believe in magical, wonderful, right? Beautiful, special things?
Yeah.
Why not?
I just think for some, I know early in my grief, when other people were like, I saw a rainbow today and I knew it was my brother, I'd be like, F you.
Yes. Same.
I felt jealous and mad the same way I would when people are like, I'm going to my dad's 86th birthday. And I'm like, your dad's a jerk. How come you got him for 6 years after, longer than my dad? My dad was a little bit of a jerk too, but those kind of reactions, I think, are still about the pain.
Totally.
And when some of the pain stabilized, I had more opportunity to believe in those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my mom did the same thing. My mom lost her brother when I was just telling her, my mom grew up with like an Irish Catholic family where they had like 8 brothers and sisters. So they were like kids raising kids, and like the parents were both alcoholics. Like it was just like chaos. But the closest
That's
brother
very
to
familiar.
her drowned when he was young. So, and she's always so angry still to this day. It's been, 50 years that he never came to her.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, he's in a better place. He'll come to you. He'll send you signs, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, and to this day, she'll tear up now talking about it. Be like, he's never come to me, and so she gets mad about that,
I've talked to some grieving parents too, who are like, I don't want my kid to come to me as some spirit version.
Yeah.
I just want them. I want them in life.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I don't know
Right.
if you control it or not.
Right.
But I don't think it's like if you're a good person and you do
Right.
your spirituality correctly, you get to see a butterfly. I don't think it's that.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit more like grace or
Yes.
forgiveness or something.
Yeah.
You can do some work on those things, but I think they're just something that sort of land in you at some point energetically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's definitely a half an hour, but I still want to ask one more. I want to ask one more question, and then one more after that, just to make sure that you get everything you want to say.
Extra credit.
Yes. So this one's about. Come on, phone. I should be able to use this. I'm technically a millennial. I'm an elder millennial, but anyway. Okay, so I think it's important to talk about family dynamics because. Mm-hmm. We just work with, we don't grieve alone. There's a whole family involved usually. So it says very little, I say very little can shift relationship dynamics more than death and dying. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole section of your book that covers relationships. So what changes to grievers most often, what changes do they report when it comes to friends and family?
That section of my book is called "Why Do I Suddenly Hate All My Friends and Family?"
Yeah,
that's what the title
exactly.
So it's leading the witness yet again.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a couple of things. One is death is hard for everybody. It's hard for clinical experts. We don't say the right thing. We don't do the right thing. Everybody says like to be a good supporter of a griever, you need to go close, but like you don't always want to go close. It's hard on everyone. And what's really crappy about that inside a family system is that like, the griever, as if there's one, is the blast site. They're the person that needs support. But I come from a family like your mom comes from. I have 5 brothers and sisters, total chaos. Every one of them lost their mom. Mm-hmm. And that's different than my mom, by the way. My mom was my mom. Their mom was their mom. So we talk about grief like it's a shared experience. And it is sort of existentially, but it's also very individual and alone. Yeah. And it is very common and a fight response to be pissed. Not just pissed about them dying, but pissed at the world that seems to still be spinning. It's so insulting. Mm-hmm. Said this yesterday at Grieftastic. I had this like quieting inside my system when the Queen died. I don't care about the Queen. Mike is English, but we don't care about the Queen. What I cared about was what her funeral looked like. All of England stopped. Like I actually think they stopped their clocks. They came outside and honored her. And I was like, that is what should have happened for my mom. Mm-hmm. Every person on the planet should have stopped and revered her life. And of course, that's never going to happen. But that's how big it is inside of you. That is what it feels like. And when I saw that happen, I was like, oh my God. It's like learning that the Sphinx was built in honor of a king's wife who died. And I'm like, that makes way more sense to me than somebody being like, I just think we should build it. But like, my pain is that big. And that is very hard when the people around you can't see that, don't understand it. You don't have the words to explain it, or also have been through that kind of pain and they don't want to get near yours. There's this bullshit thing that we do where we say like only a griever can really show up for another griever. But in my personal experience and my clinical experience, those people sometimes do the worst stuff. They are the worst disappointment because you thought. I had a client who left his job because he had a child die of SIDS, and he knew that there was another man in his office whose kid had died of SIDS, and that guy wouldn't make eye contact. And I know why that guy couldn't make eye contact, because he couldn't go near the pain. But for my client, it was such an unbearable betrayal. So there's something about relationships that we can't control. And what I always talk about, we teach this curriculum called the Grief Mentor Method, and it's MENTORO it's outside. You have to go outside your current support network. You just have to. I don't care how long you've been friends with your girlfriends. You go to Nashville every year. They know you from before. That's who they chose. They picked that person and that friend. And to some degree, it's so unfair. You're the person betraying the system. You're the person who's changed. And they don't know what to do with you. And I mean, I have been on the receiving end of people being really angry. You know, they gave me some time, but then they were like, you didn't call me on my birthday? And I was like, my mom died 8 months ago. I know, but 8 months when you're not grieving seems like a long time. It
does seem like a long time, yeah.
And I was sort of like, no. I'm still on my hall pass for caring about anybody else.
Yeah.
It's hard, and relationships are really hard.
Yeah. This is along the same vein, but I always say like family dynamics don't just get better because something happened, you know, or like it gets worse. Like when I think about my hospice patients and like a death occurring or the dying process slowly happening, it's not like this family that has been dysfunctional for 50 years is going to suddenly not be dysfunctional and be able to care for them and make good decisions and work together. It's like, no. Everything's going to feel like it's imploding, because like it kind of is, because no one's at their best.
Well, and when my mom died, so I have 5 brothers and sisters, my mom was like Grand Central Station. All the trains came to her. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have to make 5 phone calls a week to know what was going on with my family. I would know my brother was in Bermuda because my mom would tell me. And then I'd talk to him like 3 weeks later and be like, how is Bermuda? But she's not here to do that. And so, I mean, we're 5 years more than that into it, and we're still trying to find our feet. It has really impacted. We're much looser because she's not there to hold us tight. Yeah. And I think for some families, someone steps into that matriarch role. And like, I mean, my mom was 5 feet tall and weighed like 98 pounds, but she was way too big for us to try to, you know, step in a role. That role is going to lay empty for us. But it has been a interesting and hard place to navigate. Of like, oh, the relationships that we had required a third. Mm-hmm. We required her to do some of the closeness that we thought we had.
Which is a whole other thing. Then you're like, wow, okay, I guess maybe we don't. Or do I? Or it's just a whole different dynamic.
I mean, I think it's, at least with my siblings, I think we don't. I think we love each other, but the closeness component was on account of her, you know, being a matriarch who she really did. It was like the king, like, you know, like pay me the coins. Like she required those phone calls, and then she held the currency, and we appreciated that. It meant it's a lot of work to call 5 brothers and sisters. Yeah. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of phone calls.
Okay. Before we close out, is there anything that, you know, in your book that you wanted to mention, or anything closing that you feel like it's important to talk about?
The only thing that I always say about this book when I'm talking about it is that the last section of the book is the part that I think is the most important. So the book is built to be as easy as possible to read. So for you as a griever, or to give it to somebody else. So actually, when I give copies of this book, I give 2, like one for you and one for someone else. And I like the idea of people reading it before you're grieving, A, because it's just easier to learn anything. Mm-hmm. But B, it's meant, you pick it up and you can go to the part about why do I have memory loss. the last section of the book was the only section. My publishers and I didn't fight about it. They were just like, look, you're putting in sort of current information and it's going to date your book. And I was like, I actually don't care. The last section of the book is when do you need to go see a therapist, right? Grief is not a problem that we have to solve in therapy. It's just a developmental experience that we need support with, except sometimes it needs treatment. And I feel like I'm a good voice for that because my grief needed treatment and I knew it. I was sick. It made me sick. And it's hard to know the difference between grief that you can support a friend through, support a family member through, and grief that actually has symptoms that are getting worse, that typically are an indicator of things like PTSD. And so I'm not trying to turn people into clinicians, but I want you to be able to know the difference, because what happens for grievers is somebody like their Aunt Marge 3 months in is like, well, I don't think Shelley's doing very well. And we need people to be like, shut your mouth, Aunt Marge. That's just your opinion. Like, nobody needs your opinions. She gets more time than this. And I also think at 3 months, if somebody is getting less and less sleep and their ruminations are more relentless and they are becoming more and more isolated, that this book gives you some guidance about how to approach them and say, could we maybe get an evaluation? I do not think you need to wait for a year, which is what most of my clients do with really profound symptoms, to earn your way into seeing somebody who can provide, not just say, tell me how you're feeling, but provide you some treatment.
Can you say the really profound symptoms? What are some main profound symptoms?
I mean, all the physical. So, people's sleep, you can't do anything if you don't sleep.
Yeah.
And I have worked with people who are, the way they are jerry-rigging getting sleep is bonkers.
Yeah.
They're walking their dog at 3 a.m, and then they're drinking or taking pills or something, and they're barely functioning.
Yeah.
And they even sometimes have doctors who are prescribing into that, but they're not doing the other things that we know how to do, which is like regulate the central nervous system with things like bilateral stimulation and certain kinds of exercises.
Okay.
So sleeping, eating, the ruminations, which I also said, sometimes folks will have physical pain. Those 12 systems in our body are, they're like your reproductive tract and your respiratory tract and so any one of those systems, the book takes you through. That's where the folks who have their hair is falling out, they tend to go to the doctor faster because they're like, my hair is falling out. The problem is when you get to that doctor, they don't even ask you.
They don't ask you, are you grieving? No.
So part of the looking at the symptoms is so that you can say to folks, like, I didn't know that lower back pain was a grief symptom. I didn't know that. And then when I sort of learned the physiology of it, it's like, oh, I rarely actually have lower back pain now, because when I feel it twinging, it sends the code to me like, oh, there's some grief somewhere in your system, and it cues me to use all my grief tools. So it's been a while. I actually haven't really significantly thrown my back out since Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And then I was in bed for a few days.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, right?
Well, thank you. You're so wonderful. And there are books here. Can you tell me, or end of the hour?
Yeah.
So,
does anybody want to ask questions? I felt like there could be some. There might be one. Yeah.
Do you find that grief is ever fully cured, or does it kind of keep popping up occasionally? Even if you've gone through therapy and gone through all the steps, it could just pop up one day, years later, without even, it's never fully cured. Is that right?
Yeah. I don't even think of it as like an ailment. So the way that I describe it is it's the energy that's created in the body on account of loss, right? So almost more like hunger. And so it will ebb and flow your whole life because the loss is always there. And so you will experience, I've had clients who their mother died when they were pregnant and then they had a baby. And so their experience was their mother died and they were grieving, but they didn't really miss her because it was chaotic and they were having, and then their daughter got married and they were sadder for a whole year than they had ever been in their whole life because they wanted to share this moment with their mother. They always thought they would, and they wanted to ask their own mother about her experience when they were getting married. So there's this, I think Hope calls it re-grief, like a way in which you re-enter the experience of loss, even though the loss itself happened a long time ago. So I don't think it's cured, but I also don't think it's an ailment. I think it's something that is just a part of us, like becoming a parent. Nobody's ever asked me, when do you expect to not be a parent anymore? I'll be a parent
Right.
forever. I'll be a griever forever. But the degree of the pain does ebb and flow. And I think one of the tasks of grieving is learning tools to sort of almost like bulking up your muscles to kind of carry it. That's such a good question. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
I know you briefly touched on your book for a bit, but how do men and women differ in their grief process?
Oh, such a good question. Oh, okay, everybody buckle in for another hour. So I actually work a lot with men. I work a lot with CEOs. I'm going to use an example, and then you're going to be like, oh, I get it. One of the questions I ask my clients, my male clients, when they come in, who are running companies, and, I ask them, and how old are you? And how many hours of sleep do you get a night? And do you use the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom? And they always they're like, what? And I'm like, do you go to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom? And most of my men say no. And then they smile a little bit. And so what I know is that they are dissociated from their bodies. So then I ask the next questions. Do you eat when you're hungry? Sometimes that's yes, but it's usually because they get lightheaded so the people that I'm referring to are folks who are working at a high intensity and trying not to be disrupted by feelings. My experience with women is that they have been conditioned their entire life to be in their feelings, that they have support, language around their feelings, and that it doesn't minimize their gender definition to say that they exist. So the language that I often have with male grievers, and Hope or Charlene, you could answer this question too. The language that I often hear is that it is self-punishing or a description of a failure when they are grieving, and that people can see it rather than being able to sort of tough it out. And then the physical symptoms often are much worse. So the physical symptoms are often, migraines, and I've had people with going to ear, nose, and throat doctors with all kinds of, again, physical symptoms that are grief related. So I do think there's a difference. I also think that we're learning sort of about gender, that it has this huge spectrum. And so part of what I'm learning to do is just sort of say, that's traditionally thought of as a masculine reaction. That's traditionally thought of as a feminine reaction. Like, where do you fall across those things? Like, does it feel weak to you? Is that
interesting? Yeah. Because I relate to the I guess the masculine part. That's I would, if you were interviewed. Yeah, it sounds like me. That's what I sound like. I'm more on the masculine end.
There's also in grief theory this concept, which is people find really comforting. And this doesn't necessarily fall specifically across gender lines, although I find, although that is what it was looking at, is that there's intuitive grief. This is Ken Doka's work. It's designed to sort of describe what we witness, which is there are people who are more emotional in their grieving. So they are sitting there and they are crying and they are expressing and then there's instrumental grief, which is more doing. So they're making phone calls and they're, calling the funeral home and they're showing up and they're cleaning things and often folks will have done that for 2 years, come in and tell me that they didn't grieve. That my dad died, but I didn't grieve. And I'll say, what did you do during that time? Did you And then I say, that is grieving. That's a grieving. It's just when you say to folks, what do you think grieving is? They generally think it's crying.
Yeah.
But grief is a whole spectrum of behaviors.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to add? So this is Charlene Lamb, who is also just a new author. Congratulations, Charlene. She has an incredible platform. Do you want to just say one thing about it?
Oh, that I use the lens of curating and the metaphor of exhibitions to help people deal with the piles of physical stuff, but also the piles of emotional stuff. And Meghan kindly included me in the book. So,
She's in here.
yes.
Her work is extraordinary. So think of all the things that were left behind of your grievers. Charlene has a process to teach you to sort of curate, right? Curating grief, and then create an art exhibit of the work. I've chosen every
Ooh, I
time I
love
think
that.
about it. We're going to be teaching up at Crapalo together in January, which I'm so excited about, along with Allison Gilbert and Barry Liner Grant from the Memory Circle, which is so exciting. And this is Hope Edelman from Motherless Daughters, as I said, my team of people. Thank you for being here. Did you guys want to add anything to what I said a
Just to
minute ago?
add to the styles question, I'm much more of an instrumental griever.
Yeah.
So when my mother died suddenly, January 2013, my first thing was, I'm going to make a list.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a spreadsheet. I'm going to make a binder, and like the tabs are going to be beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah.
was my approach, and that's why with the objects as well, because
Yeah.
the objects help me to
Yeah.
access the feelings, because I'm not a crier, right? So it's very interesting, the different styles. And
Yeah.
the example I have of like men grieving, a young British man came by one of my exhibitions, and he decided to make a film about this curating grief process, and he brought a selection of his father's things to me in Lisbon. I live in Lisbon now. But the film actually became part of his grieving process. And it was so interesting to hear this young 20-year-old man say, I developed bulimia.
Yeah.
When my father was dying of cancer, my grief showed up as severe social anxiety and bulimia.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And he didn't make that connection until his therapist said, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, so the CEOs that I was talking about, most of them, I would say, how long has this symptom been going on? You know, whatever the symptom was, the migraines, the thing that the doctor couldn't tell them what the problem was and was like, you need to go see a therapist. And then I would just say, you know, they'd say a year, 18 months, 2 years. And I'd say, what happened 2 years ago? And they say, well, my dad died, but I don't think that has anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, it does. It's not enough. That insight isn't enough to cure you, but it's a start in and that, honestly, that always breaks my heart, because you know, our work, the work of the folks in the grief world, we would love for there to be a core understanding so that people don't have to wait 2 years and suffer with symptoms, that they just know what grief can look like and is, and how to get support and how to connect and, you know, how to get healthy with it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
This is kind of going into more of the metaphysical, but I lost my father to cancer. And you don't see him or get to interact with him on a physical level, but I'm constantly feeling his presence, talking with him, seeing him, relating to him. So there is this kind of, maybe it's disassociating, or maybe it's just the sense of, I never really feel like it was an end. Like, I just feel like maybe they're not there physically, but I feel like my dad's presence is with me constantly in different ways, and maybe not even physical ways, but you just feel a sense. And so I guess maybe that's a pattern of grieving as well.
Yes. And that makes me jealous, because I don't have that instinctual connection. I have to work for it. So I love that for you. What was your dad's name?
Lewis.
I love that you feel Lewis with you. I think that there are some things as grievers that we just instinctively get right, and we don't need anyone to teach us it. And it's, you know, we're wired to move towards this kind of capacity to carry our loss. And I do think there are some people, I mean, there's a whole, you know, there's theories about it, continuing bonds. You know, originally back when Freud invented psychotherapy, what he said was, you have to get over your loss, just forget about them. And we know so much better. And we have folks now who are teaching us that continuing bonds means you transfer. And Rabbi Steve Leader, who we all know, his book is here. He has a gorgeous book that really helps for you when I'm gone, which is, and the beauty of what remains, which really, I mean, he's been a real teacher to me, because what he says is, when you see something that makes you miss your mother, and for me, sometimes that's like birds on the lawn, or she loved the ocean. And so when the ocean sparkles, here are Steve's books. We're going to sell some books here tonight. I just miss my mom. And what Steve says is, look at the ocean for her through your eyes. And that's continuing bonds. And that, I know it makes me cry. I'm on my podcast talking to Steve, crying. I mean, I saw him yesterday, I was crying. But I need help with that, because I don't always feel her close. I do a little bit. It's, again, 5 years. I feel it more now. I often see numbers that I think she sends me. I've also seen a medium, and I really, again, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't nothing. I mean, he said things to me that I was like, oh no. He was like, there's a woman here. She wants you to know she met Elvis. I was like, oh, tell me more. So I mean, I just 100% believe in that. And I think we have some science, like I said before, the quantum physics that will tell you, why couldn't that be absolutely 100% true? Like, why couldn't that be true? So for you, it is.
Yeah.
And it does make me jealous, because I got to work at it. But I'm glad that Lewis is with you. Yeah.
I don't know if this rings true dealing with, I'm older and my parents and whatever, but Michael Lewis, the author, said that you can't help yourself through your life. You're building a plan. You think things are going to go, whether it's walking, seeing your daughter walk down the aisle, or, whatever it is. And when something happens to that person, that plan is blown to shreds.
That's right.
So you have to give yourself slack, and you have to give yourself time to build a new plan.
That's right.
Because that plan is over. It's never going to happen.
That's right.
You've conditioned your whole life to have that.
You've just described really perfectly, I think, why child loss is so excruciating.
Yeah. He lost his daughter.
Because part of what you're losing is all the dreams that you have been building since the second they were born. And that the minute they kick a ball, and you're like, they're going to play professional soccer. And that they are... and I think that is almost, it's not that somebody's father dying isn't more or less painful. It's that you're losing your past with them. If an old man dies, you're losing your past. You lived it with them. You have the memories of it. When you let go of those dreams, it's like, but now what? The brain is constantly predicting. So like, what happens now? And I do think when we're talking about resiliency, which is a word I have a mixed relationship with, because I think we're often looking to the one person who did okay instead of the like 7 that didn't, and being like, how did you do it? Instead of like, why couldn't they do it? I do think when we're talking about resiliency, we are talking about people who are able to like regroup and figure out how to move forward, probably not with a fully formulated plan anymore. I mean, there's a lot of us in grief where like, if you're 10 minutes late, we're pretty sure that we're going to be going to your funeral the next day. So like some of that way in which the brain predicts, it's kind of chaotic now.
You even can't predict it, because like the holidays are so hard.
Yeah.
Because so many memories are built into that, and they're all triggered.
That's
whether
right.
It's a star or a cookie or
That's totally right.
or a candlelight, and whatever it is, it brings it right back. And you
Right.
forgotten about it.
So what I do in this book is I just give you some things to do in that moment. The thing that I love the most that I do, and my husband can tell you I do it all the time, is I will have a moment where something hurts a lot. It could be the grocery store. It could be, an email I got. It could be, often it's something, our kids do something awesome, and I wish I had my mom to call, because my mom would let me brag about our kids in a way that you would never do to anyone else. So I just miss the hell out of her. And I have this thing I talk about in the book, which is the triangle of trust. I have 3 people, my sister and 2 best friends. And I text them and I'm like, it hurts. I don't even really tell them what it is. Like, I miss my mom so bad. I have a headache.
Mhm.
And one of them always overreacts. Oh my God, I'll call you immediately. Like, where are you? Pull over. It's usually my sister. I'm like, it's fine. Like, I just need you to know. One of them is not available because she has a big fancy job. And 2 days later, she'll be like, I just saw your text. How are you doing? But I like that even. I like getting it. And the other one will, usually put a swear in there because my mom had a very salty mouth and will say like, oh, your mother would have fucking hated that or something funny. And then I'm not alone in the moment. And then I'm connected to these 3 people. I didn't need to tell them what happened. I just told them I was in pain. And then I'm not alone in the moment. So during the holidays, I really am like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then how are we going to, when people say to me, how do I manage the anniversary? How do I get through the holidays? What is unsaid is with the least amount of pain. And I can't promise you that.
Yeah.
I can't promise you the least amount of pain. I know that's what we're hoping for. So instead, what I say is, let's manage the holidays with a whole bunch of tools, expecting that there's going to be some pain. What are the tools that work for us? And it's really good to practice those tools before we get to the hot days, right? And, Netflix, under the covers, potato chips, that's a totally reasonable mechanism to get through some of these days. If you're doing it for 4 months straight, then let's talk. But a little healthy dissociation, it's excellent.
You don't got to tell me twice.
You're right. Potato chips. Yes.
Which one of the 3 books talks about manifesting stuff physically?
And you mean having physical symptoms? This book talks all about. So this book is the story of my experience with PTSD after my mom died. So you'll see me manifest the symptoms in here. I get really sick really fast. This book talks about the 12 systems, how grief can show up in the body, and I don't just leave you there. I also give you a whole bunch of things that you can try to sort of help regulate your system.
So have you had clients who had very heavy physical symptoms?
Yes.
And they've been relieved of that?
You mean from using techniques? Yeah. So I'm a trauma therapist who specializes in grief and loss. So when someone has really terrible physical symptoms, the tools I'm using are my trauma tools, if that makes sense. So they're clinical tools like EMDR, which is an eye movement and desensitization reprocessing tool that uses the optic nerve. So when someone's body is ringing like a gong, it doesn't matter to me if it's because their wife died or because someone carjacked them. I'm going to get in there with my tools and try to help that system come from a 14 down to an 8. And yeah, I mean, the tools reduce symptoms. They do.
And they're in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about them in the book, but they're not, I mean, even when I had them, I had to go into a treatment facility so that someone could do the treatments on me. They're not really something that you can do to yourself or learn from a book, but I specifically say, if you have this intensity of symptoms, this is the kind of therapist to go see. These are the initials after their names. These are the things that they should be trained in. And here's how to find them in your city. Yeah. It's in there because it's really important to know how to find those folks. And I wish I could tell you they're all over the place, and they're not. It's hard to find and it's expensive.
It's hard to, yeah, there you go. It's hard to find it.
It's a big commitment.
It's hard to find.
And again, I feel like I have to apologize for that. We're working really hard we're working hard to train people, and we're working hard to make it, but there will always be more need than we can fill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you guys. Thank you for listening.
You guys. Thank you. Every time you talk, girl, I'm like,
you're the bomb.
You're so
Thank
great.
you for doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay.
Love you.
We'll hang around if people want to buy books. Buy Steve Leder's book. It's so beautiful.
He is so warm and lovely.
He's just